It's now my pleasure to now welcome our CEO of ALIA, the wonderful Sue McKerracher, host a panel discussion of the winners of the awards, and we're looking forward to those discussions, Sue, this afternoon. So over to you, Sue, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paula, and thank you, Janine. I just want to again say thank you to Janine for chairing this panel for the last 3 times that we've done these awards. And Janine has been such an inspiration to libraries around Australia over the time, because also she sits on the IFLA Libraries Building and Design Committee and takes our designs out there into the world. So it's been terrific to have Janine here. Fantastic panel of judges. And a great result today. So thank you all so much. So thank you, Paula. Thank you, Janine. And now I'd like to welcome to join us here today. I'd like to invite Craig Askin from Ormiston Centre for Learning and Innovation, our School Library Award winner representative. We've got Sasha Jenkins from UTS Library, our academic library winner. We've got Carolyn McLeod from Marrickville Library and Pavilion, who's won the Public Library Award. And Sarah Slade is rejoining us from the State Library of Victoria. So if I could ask everybody to make themselves known on their video and be ready to answer some questions.
Hello there.
Hello, Craig. And we've got Caroline just joining on video. Sarah, hello.
Hi. Hi, Sue.
And Sasha.
Hi.
Hello. So I hope you're all really pleased. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's great news.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks.
Terrific. And Carolyn, it's especially a double congratulations. You won 2 of our awards.
Oh, so exciting. And that was a surprise about the award from the librarians. And I think that's for everyone that works here is the one that actually matters for us. So I'll be delighted to go and tell everyone after we get off the call from here.
Well, so what I'd love to do now is ask you a few questions, because the thing is, you've won the awards, you've got the great libraries, but now we want to know the backstory. So what I'd like to do is start up by asking you the easy question, which is, what's the thing that you're most pleased about by your design? So I'm going to kick off with Craig, and I'm going to say, what about your school library? What's the best?
It really is not an easy question to put your finger on what is the best thing about it. I think one of the things really is about our library, Centre for Learning and Innovation, being connected to our teaching and learning framework. And there's so many spaces in the building that can engage students in different ways in the 21st century, whether it be collaboration, whether it be ICTs for learning, whether it be opportunities for skillful communication. There's a space in our building for each and every one of those students to engage, whether it be in large groups, small groups. It really does suit everyone.
And what's been the feedback from students and teachers?
It's busy all the time. People just can't wait. It's a P to 12 school. There's often fights, if you will, to try and get in the spaces and use them. So it's probably one of the downsides at times that so many people want to be there for learning and use those particular spaces.
And have you got any groups of kids who've kind of adopted a particular space and won't let it go?
No, not really. Everyone sort of takes their turn, which is nice. We certainly, whether it be the younger students on campus right through to our year 12s, there are some favourite spaces, but everyone has a turn.
Great. Sasha, let's go to you. What's your favourite thing about the design or the process that you went through?
I really love that our spaces are so well designed that our clients really know what is the appropriate behaviour in the space. It's like if you go into our reading room, clients are automatically quiet and thoughtful and sit down and get into that kind of space to study and contemplate. And then there are other little spaces that are warmer and cozy, and they know they can collaborate and talk or whatever. And I have got to reduce our amount of signage massively since we moved to the new space. And I just think that's so important when it just comes from the design experience.
Having visited your reading room, I know what a beautiful, airy, spacious area it is. Are you getting lots of people coming back in now with COVID in a slightly better space?
We are, and in fact, we're a little bit in trouble with too many students because we've mixed classes now, some online, some face-to-face. Students are really coming back into the library and spending the day with us and then just popping out when they do have a face-to-face class. So yes, massively popular.
Because with UTS, obviously you're right in the middle of Sydney, and you must have quite a lot of students who don't have a lot of their own personal space, you know, they're quite cramped. Was that a big consideration of the space of your library?
It was, and I think, but I don't think we realised how much, and it was really during COVID where all classes went online, but the library was still open, and we were amazed at the amount of students that turned up every day. And it was a real sign of actually space at home isn't right for learning, and that they do need reliable Wi-Fi and somewhere quiet and, you know, all of those things that would draw you to a library.
Thank you. Caroline, coming on to the double award winner. What's your favourite thing about Marrickville?
Wherever you look, it's interesting and beautiful. And so for our customers, like the previous speakers have talked about, you can go and have a very intimate spot or be part of the community, but there's lots of amazing vistas, and the architects have integrated the most amazing heritage building with a contemporary building. So it's really a very interesting space, and it also has amazing warmth to it. So you immediately walk in and you feel incredibly comfortable. So the people that are in the library is also a very satisfying thing to walk around and see people here all day, like UTS. It's so satisfying for me, and yeah, that's it.
But if you were talking to somebody who'd never visited the library, and I confess I haven't, I'm sorry, but I will. What's the thing that you'd say, oh, when you visit, you've got to look out for?
So it's actually a heritage hospital that has a contemporary building over the top of it. So you walk into a very modern building and then you see this heritage hospital that you might not necessarily click, or there's an old building in a new building. And so when you walk around, there's a lot of sustainability features incorporated into the design. So we've got a lot of recycled wood. We've got 85,000 recycled bricks that was taken from the site. And so there's lots of little special details that if you talk to the librarians, they're really happy to share those with you to show you what it's like. And then you can imagine in our reading room, for example, which is our quiet study area, that was previously where people would come after surgery and they'd be in hospital, and so it was all lined up with beds, and then you'd be rolled out into the balcony where you'd have city views. So there's pictures of what it was like in the early 1900s, so you can imagine what it was like then, and now you're in this beautiful contemporary library.
Sounds gorgeous. And it sounds like you've got similar issues to Sarah as well when it comes to heritage building, modern use. So Sarah, switching to you, what do you love about the State Library of Victoria?
I think there's a few, I know you said one, there's a few things that are interconnected if that's okay. The main one is how welcoming the buildings and the spaces are now. One of the things that we wanted to address was that sense of, you know, the Swanson Street entry to the library when you used to go in could seem very intimidating, and people didn't know whether they could keep going or not. And then when they got into the other spaces, they didn't realise what else was there. So I think the welcoming sense of it, and the fact, as Sasha said with her library, that there's a space for everyone. Everyone can find a space where it works for them in terms of what the offer is without upsetting anybody else. And the visibility, one of the design elements was that wherever you are in the library, you can see glimpses of what's happening in another space. So you might be in the Ian Potter Queen's Hall as a reading room or as an event space, and you can look down through windows and see into the children's quarter, or you can see into the main information spaces. So everywhere you are, you see an image of what other people are doing, even though it's completely different to what you're doing. And I think that's been really successful.
And you said you had another one?
So the last one is really, as I talked about in the speech, it's about how well the thinking behind all of Vision 2020 has adapted to a post-COVID environment. We had one of our board members at a board meeting throughout the year said one of the things about any crisis is that it really allows you to stress test the purpose of your organisation, which I'm sure all of us with libraries felt that we came through well. And so I sort of applied that to Vision 2020. And when we reopened after the long lockdown, there was always the risk that all of the COVID interventions would undermine what we were trying to do. And it didn't. So Vision 2020 survived the crisis as well, which was really nice.
That's so satisfying that you planned for an eventuality you didn't know was going to happen.
Yeah. I know, it's lovely.
That first question about what do you love most about your library was actually to lull you into a full sense of security. Because on this conference today, we've got lots of people who are going to be starting out on their own refurbishment or new build adventure. And it's very nice to hear from you guys now that, yes, it's all successful, we're award-winning, it's all beautiful. But I bet it wasn't like that 12 months into this process. And I bet there have been some challenges along the way. So I'd like to go background and I'd like you to share with us in this cone of silence the kind of the moment where you felt most challenged and you thought, how are we going to fix this thing? And just talk us through that process of, yeah, it doesn't always go right, but what do you do? How do you move it into a good place? So I'll go to the middle. I'll go to Sasha at this point and say, what happened at UTS?
I think the hardest thing was it was a very long project at UTS. So I think it was 10 years from when we first started talking about design to actually moving into the building. And probably 5 years of that were build after the design phase. So inevitably, everything that we did had changed and moved on, and we were quite a different library by the time the building was happening. And invariably, you're going to take your staff through at some point, and they're going to look and go, oh, now that I'm looking at this space, that's wrong, and that's not the way I thought this would be. And so that question of how do you iterate design, because the whole way construction works is very formalized, and it's hard to change and still be on time and on budget and those things. But are there little opportunities in there? And there were a couple for us, but finding those and dealing with those and going, okay, that wasn't quite what we expected, or, oh yeah, we did ask for that, but now I'm looking at that going, that was crazy. Why did we ask for that? Because it was 5 years ago. And that was really, really challenging. And sometimes the solution was, renegotiating with the builders and the designers around the way a particular thing worked. And sometimes it was going back with our staff and going, maybe we need to rethink our service and how we operationalize that and the way we deliver services. Let's try some other things that might work really well with the space. So doing both to try to iterate and keep up with, libraries are constantly changing places at the moment. And last year especially. And it's just, how do we future-proof? How do we iterate? How do we keep changing through the process?
10 years is a heck of a long time. I've just realised the kind of digital transformation that we've seen in the last 10 years. And so what I'm taking from that is you must have been talking to your designers, to your architects, to your builders throughout that process and saying, oh, actually, libraries have changed now. Now we do this thing. Now we do that.
Well, library staff changed too. So the people talking to the builders changed. We changed university librarians. We changed. So and it was all because it was part of a campus master plan. There was a lot of building happening and we were a piece of that. So, but obviously a new university librarian is going to have quite different ideas and as different staff moved through as well.
So I'm getting from that if you're starting out your building project, prepare to have lots of reasons and lots of back paperwork about why you said this at that point, so that you can explain it to the next people who come in.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, and to be flexible, because yeah, sometimes you can't predict the way things are going to change.
Carolyn, we'll come on to you. How long was Marrickville in the planning and delivery?
The librarian 63 years ago first put in to a annual report that Marrickville needed a new library, and since that time there have been library staff saying we need a new library. And when I started on the project, there was someone who had been for a job interview 20 years prior and was told we're building a new library. So people really didn't believe that it was going to happen in Marrickville, and it was definitely an on-again, off-again project. And it ended up coming to fruition because we partnered with Mirvac. And so there was a land exchange. And so Mirvac actually built the library to our specifications and funded it. And Marrickville just paid for the collection and the library technology, which we got a grant from the State Library for. So it was very long process, and I came into the project at the detailed design phase and to deliver the project. And throughout that period, there was council amalgamations. And so that completely changed our service as well, because we merged with 2 other councils. So we went from 4 libraries to 8 libraries, and our staff effectively doubled, and we had to change our whole model and operations. So midway through, we had to really redesign a large portion of it because we didn't require as much staffing space. And then we also made a decision not to include local studies and to have a museum and to have quiet study. And that was the point where I was feeling slightly nervous about making the call, because I felt like local history was going to be digitised, and I'd had that feedback from my team. And so then we said, okay, let's just have quiet study. And people, that was a little controversial, and not everyone thought that was such a great idea. But as it turned out, that's what the library has really, where we've seen really new customers come in, and we never had university students, and we never had people working from home. And now that's been a big growth area in our library.
And that is incredible. 63 years is just huge. Did you have a team of people working on this project separate from the operations, or was it people who were involved in the day-to-day operations having to also on the side do a building project?
Yes, it was people doing the operations and doing the building project. And in the same year, we rolled out a new LMS because we amalgamated and we had a restructure. And so we all thought we were close to nervous breakdowns, but we're all fine and very happy now that it's all over. But I am not actually a trained librarian. So I had one of my managers, Joanne Shaw, who's listening in. She provided all of the advice around the sort of library functions and did that very difficult work around the shelving and the linear meters. And there was a lot of things that I had to learn from her about. Am I still on the screen? Because my computer's logged out.
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. So I had to be very trusting in my team that we were going to be delivering something that was going to work, because I hadn't had any experience with that, but I'd had experience with the community and other sort of project management and community projects.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like quite a challenge. Thank you, Caroline. Craig, how about you?
Look, one of the things for us is communication. We had a wonderful working relationship with BSP and our architects and Rotary Constructions, and some of those challenges that we faced along the way were worked through. It was about sharing the vision of what we wanted the building and the spaces to be, and just keeping that dialogue going the whole way through. We had a significant amount of input from a number of different people, both staff who work at the college, but also people who are on our board of directors, etc., that gave up their time to, really just focus in on the delivery of a new learning building here at the college. So it really was about just that ongoing communication. Those architects have been with us on other projects. So it was really about, us sharing what we wanted, what we needed, our learning spaces to be about, and they were on the same wavelength. And as challenges came, we just continued to have conversations to work around problems and issues, and deliver the space that we have now today.
So Craig, would you advise people who are going to be starting their own project to have a communications plan that runs alongside the development plan?
Yes, I think so. I think, it's having that clear vision about, what you want the building to be. It makes it an awful lot easier for everyone involved to be able to come up with the plan, come up with the solutions to problems that arise when everyone's sort of on the same page.
And I'd like to just ask Craig and Caroline, actually, and Sasha as well, and Sarah, how do you communicate with your community? Because what you don't want to do is start too early, get everyone excited, and then say, well, you're going to have to wait 5 years for this. But at the same time, you want to bring them along with you on the journey. Craig, starting off with you, do you have any advice about that one?
Food is probably the big one. We for a number of years, we're not a relatively old school, but one of the biggest things was integrating a cafeteria with the building. But everything that's in those spaces was a step up. It was something new and special that people hadn't experienced before. Whether it was the quiet place to go and read, that was a step up from what we had before. Whether it was the new canteen and cafe, miles away from what the students in the formative years had here on campus. So, when people can experience these things, they see the benefits.
I'm just going to go back to Sasha and Caroline, and then I'm going to come back to Sarah because I've got lots of questions about the State Library. Sasha, in terms of communicating with your students, your faculty, with the people who are going to be using the library, at what point did you bring them in, and how did you keep that conversation going?
Well, like I said, because it was such a long period, they came into our design process early on. But then there was quite a long period before it was delivered, and they loved the old library. And actually we found we had to be really careful at not undermining the value of the old library, that people were very attached to it. Lots of our staff had been students here, and, people actually had really strong feelings. So we had to be really careful about how we spoke about the new building and make sure that there was a story that was about continuity of experience. So we were quite careful about our comms, and we couldn't be too rah-rah all new library, and particularly because it took so long. That was a really good approach for us.
I think that's so true, actually, because I remember visiting the old UTS library, and to be honest, it was a bit dark and a little bit shabby around the edges. But I did feel a lot of love from the staff about that space. So you're right, me banging in and saying, oh, this is too dark, we should go for a nice airy building, would probably not have gone down well. Caroline, how about you?
We did a lot of communication with our community when we were engaging with them about what they wanted with the library. And then when there was the decision to go with Mirvac, there was a little bit of unhappiness around the building of high-rise facilities. And so then the communication pretty much stopped. And when construction started, there was a community campaign that was where all residents put up posters in their house or out the front of their houses that said Marrickville, not Mirvacville. So then we actually, and that was related to another development, but that did raise a challenge for us. So the site actually then got covered just with black hoardings, and we kept those up, and we had a for up until the day before the library opened, and we actually didn't start the real communications until about 6 weeks prior to the opening. And we also had bans on people taking photos for staff or any visitors to the library, because the plan around the communications was everyone actually knows what happens in a library. Everyone knows about the computer. Everyone knows about the lounge room, the third place. And what was so special for this library was how fabulous it was inside and what it looked like. And so we really created an element of surprise. And people were saying to us, oh, we don't understand how a library could be that big, and what are you going to do, and how are you going to fill a library, just from what they could see beyond the hoardings. And so we just did tiny little sort of a teaser campaign where we just take a photo of a view from the library, or a brick in the library, or a chair in the library, and say sort of things, will you be sitting in this library? So it took a lot of convincing to the communications team that this was the right way to go. And so the hoardings came down, and on our opening day, we had 6,000 people plus turn up on day one. And it was just so great, and it really worked well for us, because people didn't know what to expect, because they hadn't seen any photographs, or if they had seen photographs, it was from the design competition 4 years previous, like 4 years ago. So they may have forgotten about it. So that worked well for us, and we're about to do another library open in Haberfield soon, and we're doing a slightly similar campaign, so that we're getting people into the library so they can see what's in there once it's opened. And then we really push our communications once the library is open to say, come in and visit us and check us out.
Thank you, well, thank you all, because that's really different ways of approaching the comms. I'm going to turn to Sarah, because you've got 2 questions to answer now.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, good.
What's the challenging moment that you had during the process? And I'm sure there were quite a lot to choose from, because it was a massive project. And the other is the communication with people that were using the library.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I think the most challenging moment in the whole thing was when we'd done a lot of very detailed investigations into unknown site conditions. And, you know, we had a contingency for things that would come about as we went through the project. But having 23 different buildings from those who saw the presentation from all those different eras, there was a moment where quite a number of unknown site conditions became visible, and the impact of that on there was a moment where we had to re-look at whether we changed the vision of what we were going to complete, whether we could change the program, what the budget implication would be, what the impact would be to both users and staff, because some of those hazardous materials, obviously staff would be concerned about working close to them if all the protections weren't correct, and we didn't want to put anyone at any risk. So, and to address all of those issues, we came up with an approach that meant running 24-hour shifts for about a month, which meant that there was a lot of noise across the library, and also potentially to residents who live nearby. So the testing regime and the communication regime we put in around that it worked beautifully. But the investigations into how we were going to address the significance of that problem right in the middle of the project, that was the moment that was the most challenging. And the good thing is no one knew. That's good.
Well, I suppose that's another thing that you can't predict, isn't it?
Yeah. And obviously all of us who've got heritage buildings, you know, at home, you know, older buildings that we live in or that we work in, know that there's always that risk. And there's only so much contingency in terms of time and budget you can allow for it. And some things just blow that completely. And I think that one of them, going back to your very first question, another of the most pleasing things is that you look at all of that at the end and you realise you've addressed things that would have been problems into the future. So we didn't leave any of it. We addressed all of it that we found, and that we found a way to manage the budget and delivering the vision while still addressing those problems.
I think all of you have described, and having seen the pictures of your libraries and visited some of them, you've all described a library that's very future focused, but to what degree we can imagine the future is a bit questionable. So I'd like to ask you kind of to summarise now, what do you think, how far into the future do you think this design will take you? And you know, at what point do you think you need to start thinking again about what the next iteration should be? And also, what's your advice for the people on this conference who are about to set off or are partway through this process that you've been on? So, Craig, I'm going to come back to you for when are you going to have to do this again, and what's your advice?
As much as possible to think through what might be some of the possibilities. I know built into the design phase, I guess, was some options for change, because pretty much the future starts now, and as things evolve and change, this can happen very quickly. Sometimes you get into the spaces, and despite all the planning and all of the organising, you get in, and it's not quite what it needs to be. And I think when you look at other solutions and other ways around things, but sometimes it's a case of, all right, well, to be able to meet this next challenge, we might need to be a little bit flexible on what we actually do next. And in many of our spaces that we have the option of being reconfigured if we want to, without necessarily having to start from scratch. And look, that may happen, at some point in the future, where we decide that look, we need to make some changes. We need to move with the times, as it were. And I think there's a number of our spaces have the flexibility to make change without starting from scratch.
And your advice to people starting out?
Look, when you're starting out, it's I guess thinking through all possibilities. One of those big challenges we had was trying to have a period of time with a building that's right in the centre of our campus, where certain buildings, and in fact our old library, were taken away. And how do you move through a period of time where you don't have access to some of the things that you've had for a number of years? So bringing people along through good communication is key. We had a lot of patience and a lot of tolerance from our students, particularly as they work through the new build. So it's really about that communication, that vision, and trying to get those things to align.
Thank you, Craig. Sasha, same questions to you.
Yeah, well, I think last year was a really good test for us straight off. And some things we did right. We moved our staff into a much more flexible working space. Everybody got a laptop and docking stations, and we talked about how we worked much more flexibly. And wow, so good that we did, because matter of months we were okay, and everybody's working from home now, guys. So that training we put in and how we set up the space actually turned out to be so useful and so right where we needed to be. In terms of the space for students, I think I mentioned earlier that we're actually finding ourselves short of informal learning space already. And so we're looking at some of the more open, flexible spaces that were built into the building. They're not behind the library gates. The library kind of functionality is spread through the building. And there are some spots where it was quite open, flexible, a bit more social, and we're realising actually it's got to be study space. So we're already going back in. But like Craig said, it's having spaces that are flexible, and it's just a matter of changing some furniture around.
Perfect. And Sasha, advice to anyone starting out?
Yeah, I think having that flexibility built in and not committing too much to what a space is, in terms of, the building everything in and, fixing it down, because things do change. We had a whole bunch of storage cupboards, and the minute we moved in, we went, you know what, we need phone booths. So we put glass doors on and soundproofing in there, and they're perfect. They're the best phone booths. So it's that thing of, well, if you build it flexibly enough, then you'll find other uses.
Perfect. Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's exactly as Sasha and Craig were saying before. There's something about, we as I said in the speech, we're continually evolving. In fact, we had a 20-year redevelopment that had been staged into lots of things and had finished about a decade before we started this new redevelopment. And I don't think that that's necessarily unusual. I think community expectations and needs continue to change. So I think what was really good about this redevelopment that will stand the test of time is we made sense of the spaces, not in terms of confirming. I mean, we did. We have certainly spaces have their own sense and their own, providing certain things to certain audiences. But we made sense of how the city block works, how 23 different buildings can work as one. And I think that sort of deciding that and then being flexible around it will stand us in good stead. And I think the other thing is that we have to do everything you possibly can to fix any outstanding issues, because you're never going to be able to pay. They won't go away, and you're never going to be able to pay for them later, and you're going to compromise what else you have to do. So when I was talking about the hazardous materials, one of the reasons that we decided to address it all was because it was the right thing to do. And another reason that we decided to do it was because it would just be a problem for someone else who'd be passing it down the line, and it would just compromise whatever those people were trying to do at the time. So I think that flexibility is really key. And then in terms of what I would say, those would be advices that I would have for anyone starting out. But the most important advice, which goes back to one of your other questions, Sue, is communications. Do not over-communicate. Over-communicate with your community, over-communicate with your staff, over-communicate with your builders, your designers, your architects. It will all pay off during the project and afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. And I've just realised that whereas Craig and Sasha and Caroline can kind of own their buildings because they're created within their time, you're really guardians and stewards of a heritage building that will go through many future iterations as well.
Yeah, and I suppose part of that is that the moves to how audiences that we're serving, how people want to use the spaces, what we can offer them on site in a physical way and online are key. But the collection that we build, that is a collection that doesn't then go away. There's a legacy element to the collection as well as to the buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And Caroline, as the double award winner, finish us off with the advice.
My advice would be to build a team that you trust and that you enjoy working with, because I think that was very much the success of our library, was that we had fantastic relationships with BVN and the builders and Mirvac. And so there was so much sort of goodwill amongst all of us that there was a collective desire for it to be fantastic. And so you really have to trust the architects as well when you're starting out with these processes and they're saying something. And I mean, we had to really, like, for a lot of people doing a project like this, it's completely new and you're learning how to read plans and architectural drawings. So there's a huge learning curve. So you have to also be really confident to say, I don't know what that is. What does this drawing mean? Which way does this door open? And ask all of the questions so that you have a clear understanding of what you think it's going to look like, because And if you know that operationally there is something that absolutely needs to happen and people are not listening to you, that you be confident to keep on going back and saying, but what about this and what about this? It's not going to work, if you know from operationally that that's the case. And then the other thing I would say is, if there's any way that you can have some sort of stash of money hidden away for once you open, there's probably things that you will want to fix that no one has money for. For example, I don't know, the sign, you've realised, oh, you need extra signage, or we had to buy additional furniture because we had so many people coming in, we just didn't have enough seats, and we had to remove some shelving and put extra furniture in. And so I had that advice from Vicky Munro from Double Bay, that she was surprised at how much money that they needed after it had opened. So I would say that that's important. And then also listen to what your community wants from their library.
Carolyn, that's brilliant. I think all four of you have given us some great insights and some great advice. So I'd like to say a sincere thank you to our panel and congratulations.